my my camera at the moment because of my weak internet. So as Martha has mentioned, we will be recording this session. For those who cannot make it or for you to rewatch this later, recordings will be available for up to 30 days from when it was put up. So in other words, this recording will be available until 16th of December. We are pinning the video so that only presenter will be recorded. This means you can choose to keep your video on or your audio on or off. If you speak, the recording will pick your video and not your face or your name. You can type your question in the chat box if you prefer. Depending on the presenter, you can also private message her as well. Please keep your audio on mute whenever you're not speaking. Otherwise, we might pick up your background noise. Also, we encourage you to check the page, Sugar and Spice Facebook group for latest updates and announcement. And then for consent, please do not contact other participants outside the festival without their consent. You can always ask them the permission through the festival or Facebook group before messaging them. We do not want instances of participants feeling violated or unsafe. If anyone needs emotional support, please email us. The email is emotionalsupport@sugarandspiceasia. So everyone, our presenter Anupama is okay. If you want to private message her, so just private message her for any questions that you want to be addressed one-to-one. So speaking of Anupama, I hope I pronounced it right. So yes, it is right. I'm gonna introduce her. Anupama is an ever-evolving person, deeply interested in human sexual behavior. She has vastly researched alternative sexual lifestyles and has also written a series of nonfiction books on the subject with a pseudonym. She believes in transforming the outlook towards sexuality by structured, quality conversations one at a time. Apart from this space, she works as a content specialist and researcher. She writes poetry and sings for passion. Wow, maybe she will sing for us later. So without further ado, I'm going to give the floor to our presenter, Anupama.
Thank you, Kenneth. Hi, everybody. It's nice to meet you guys. So I'll just simply quickly add a bit of context to what Kenneth already said. The books that I have written are Kevin. They are about BDSM and they are non-fiction. They are from an Indian contextual perspective. I've written them with a pseudonym, and which is why I'm rewriting and presenting them as Anupama now. What I'm going to talk about today is consent, and it's interesting, and it's only incidental that Dr. Lee said that this would be the first session. I think consent is where everything is rooted, whether it's plain missionary vanilla sex with lights turned off, or whether it's everything goes under the sun sort of sex. Consent and the ability to say a no when you want to say a no, and an ability to say a yes, and to ask people respectfully whether they want to be sexually involved with you or not, is where I think the key is rooted. I'll begin with sharing a presentation. The way I've envisioned this session is that I will share a small presentation with all of you, and then we'll open the floor for questions and discussions. So I will try and share my screen now. Please let me know if, Kenneth, please let me know if you can see the presentation.
Yes, cannot see the presentation. Oh, now can.
You can.
Yes, we can.
Oh, lovely. So, so again, I will, a lot of my examples might be contextualized in the limited worldview that I have in terms of the fact that I'm based in India and that we don't talk about sex a lot. But this is not to say that places where people are more sexually empowered, where people are more open to talking about it, aren't legit experiences, or their experiences are not valid. Give me 1 second and I'll just sort of see if I can view it to window. Kenneth, could you just tell me if this is a better view? Is this the full screen view?
No, it's not.
It's not.
You can scroll. Okay, at the bottom right, there should be a maximize icon. Okay, never mind.
Sorry about this. So let's begin with what is consent. The way we understand consent is either there's a clear yes, or there is a no, or there is a maybe, or somebody doesn't respond. And the way I educate people here in India is that a yes has to be a clearly, explicitly stated yes. It has to come from a place of no substance influence in the moment. It also has to come from a place where the other person is either functioning fully in their mental capacity, or if they are struggling with some sort of mental disability, then they have to be very sure of what they are doing. So safe, sane, and consensual is how I personally operate. But I do understand that there are a lot of other people who talk about RAC, and which is risk-aware consensual kink. I know RAC is more of a BDSM term, and I will leave it for BDSM experts to discuss it in detail. But I think it applies to even the non-kinky activities. So the first thing is a yes. It has to be a clear yes. One who's giving the consent has to know that they really agree with whatever is being discussed or negotiated, whether it is about wearing a condom, whether it is about can I have sex with you, whether it is about would you like to take me out for a coffee. And one of the things that I tell younger adults out here is that it doesn't have to be consent for just sex. It can also be a consent for a conversation. If I do not feel like speaking to someone at a given point, if I do not feel like sexting them at a given point, then I don't feel like it. Also, there is nothing like blanket consent. It's not like I agree to playing with you today, or I agree to sleeping with you today. That means I agree to sleeping with you every single day. And that sort of brings us into a very treacherous zone, especially in India, where we don't have a concept of marital rape. So when a husband forces himself on a wife, or even if a wife forces herself on a husband, so most marriages in India, in fact all marriages in India, are heterosexual marriages. So keeping that in mind, what does one say when one of the spouses forces them on the other? Is that rape? Is that not rape? Legally, you're out here in this land, it's not a rape. But that's another thing that we sort of educate our people about. A maybe is not consent. A no is a no is a no, is how I sort of like to say it. And the same goes for silence. If someone hasn't responded to you, it's better to assume that they've said a no than to assume that they are saying a yes. So that's the bit about consent and non-consent. And then there is violation of consent. When someone says no and you still do an act, it could be spanking, it could be forcing them to talk to you, it could be throwing acid on their face because they refuse to love you back. And we see so many examples of violence. So all of that, whether it is about wanting to talk to someone, or whether it is about wanting to sleep with someone, or whether it is about wanting to tie someone up, all of that, if they've said a no, if they've said a maybe, if they haven't responded in a clear yes without the influence of a substance with their full mental faculty, it is violation of consent. So there's this very interesting example. I was in a session. I was with a guy whose friend was witnessing this session. So they were not involved. I was not involved with any of them. These are three independent people. And eventually, during the session, the gentleman and the lady decided to make out. They said, okay, we'll have sex. And she got a condom and she gave it to him. And he started putting it on. Apparently, he had this erectile dysfunctional disorder. And he thought he will lose his erection. And he entered her. And she was upset, and I was upset because we realized that this was a violation of her consent, and he did not. This is a 45-year-old, very well educated man that we're talking of. These are not youngsters that we're talking of. So this is one of the reasons why consent becomes all the more important to talk about, because clearly people don't understand what it is. So that again is where I come when I come from when I talk about violation of consent. Then there is the consensual non-consent, the gray area. Uh, this is one of those areas where I err on the side of caution personally, and I also tell everybody that I coach that they shouldn't venture into this space unless they have known the partner for really long and unless the trust is really strong between the two parties or more parties for that matter, because it is very tricky and it is very easy to get confused between, oh no, I want more, but I am asking you to stop. And if that is the dynamic, then it needs to be built over years. You have to really work on it, and you have to really strengthen the understanding of each other's bodies, the understanding of non-verbal cues, and you have to be very seasoned before you tread that thin line. So to err on the safer side, I usually tell people not to venture into the consensual non-consent space, but it is still a very legit and a very valid space. So this is how I say it. Out here in India, one of the common experiences that we have is that when I say a no to a guy, they think it's an invitation to negotiate. So say for instance, someone says to me, why don't you share your number with me? And I'm like, no, I don't feel comfortable. Oh, but come on, you can at least give me your Facebook ID. And I'm like, no, but I'm not comfortable. Or maybe I can have your email ID. I'm like, a no is a no is a no. I mean, my no doesn't mean that I want to talk to you. Just because I refused you once doesn't mean you have to ask me the second time. And this is a very common myth here. This is also something that the movies propagate a lot. So there's a saying, there's a phrase in Hindi, "Ladki ki naam mein haan chupi hoti hai." What it means is, what it translates to is that if a girl refuses, she's actually being coy about it and she actually wants what she's refusing. And that's a really wrong, a very mythical notion about understanding no. So a lot of the education that we do here is also around these kind of myths. I think consent is very intersectional, even if we look at the sexual space for that matter. For instance, and this is slightly derogatory, and we don't approve of this, we don't endorse this statement, but a lot of times you will hear Indian women saying to men that the only time an Indian man understands the violation of consent is when a gay man approaches him without his interest. And it is sad, but it is true, because people think that the only place to say a no is if the sexual orientations are not complementing each other. So I one of the things that I have personally experienced and that I hear a lot from the LGBTQ community and also from the kink community here in India is that we actually find queer people far more respectful of consent and the lack of it as compared to heteronormative people, um, because being on fringe makes you understand what does it mean to be um, on your toes all the time. And I personally feel that we should all have enough conversations around these subjects so that we don't have to feel on toes and we can actually openly ask stuff and we can refuse or accept as we want. So there's that. There is also the whole BDSM spectrum and the whole polyamory spectrum. And I think consent becomes all the more important there, because um, if I don't talk about stuff in detail, so here is another interesting experience. I'm a submissive person, and I had this 45-year-old, rather 50-year-old gentleman walk up to me and say, I want to play with you. And I said, why with me? And they said they wanted to play with me because they thought I was an experienced submissive. And I asked them a few questions around safe calls and safe words, and they were like, oh, you're making it sound too technical because you're going in too much detail. It has to go with the flow. I said, but I don't know you. There is no flow unless I know you well. And this gentleman got really pissed off because he thought that being a dominant or being a sadist was about having access to me just because. And the good thing is that the younger generation, at least theoretically, so over the last 15 years, I've seen the demographic shift a lot. Earlier, we were all we had more men, we had fewer women. Now we have more women, we have more youngsters in the community, and with them, what I observe is that there is a lot of discussion about things. There is detailed negotiation, and there is also more tolerance for genuine errors or genuine mistakes. So that's there. Then there is also the socio-economic section when it comes to consent. There are people in the larger cities who will talk about it a lot but will not do anything about it. There are people in the remoter parts of the country who will not maybe say so much about it but will actually practice consent. But there is also a very large section where we see a lot of misogyny, where we see a lot of male dominance, which is not consensual, which is more of I am the husband, so I own your body. I am the male partner, so I will decide how it goes. And if you, being a woman, ask for sex or refuse it, if you ask for sex, then I'm going to slut shame you. If you refuse sex with me, then I'm going to judge you. So that socioeconomic categorization is one. And then there's also a lot of caste-based narrative that we hear. And the caste-based narrative, if I had to sort of find an analogy for it, it would be like racial discrimination in the Americas, and there's a lot of the upper caste exploitation of lower caste women, primarily women, and sexual crimes are actually used as a means to take revenge. And so there is a lot of conversation around those demographics also when it comes to consent. Is there do the like how do we ensure that just because you come from a certain caste you don't lose your right to say a no? So a lot of social activists work on those areas. One of the things that I find interesting when it comes to consent is also about the quest for pleasure. So I know younger people who practice unsafe sex because they think it's fun, because they so the statement that I heard was bina condom ke maza nahi aata. I can't enjoy without a condom. I can't enjoy when I'm wearing a condom. So they think that it's okay and it's all right to sort of practice unsafe sex. So consent, I think, also overlaps with sexuality a lot in that space. Mental health and consent is a concerning area. Mental health in general in India is a concerning area. So it becomes all the more tricky to ensure that the person who's dealing with a mental health challenge is in the right space, a right frame of mind, and is consenting to an empowering experience rather than an abusive experience. The same goes for disability. We don't have a lot of conversation around physical disabilities and sex in general. Out here, the mindset is that most people just assume, oh, he or she is physically disabled, they'll get married. Great, that's enough for them. They have a livelihood, that's enough for them. And which is very disparaging and which is also very disappointing. But I hope to see changes in the near future. Proximity is it's interesting in the sense that a lot of BDSM relationships, especially out here, are long distance relationships. And in the long distance spaces, how do you ensure that there is consent for sexting or not? If I say I don't want to sext with you and you still insist, what should I do? Should I block you? Because if I block you, then the whole online element, the relationship element, sort of also gets blocked. So that's still something that people navigate. I've personally had experiences. I've heard from other women in the community that dick pictures were shoved into, and it happens all the time. Like we get a horde of dick pics in our inboxes and in our chat boxes, and it's annoying. It's a violation of our consent to conversation, but or lack of it for that matter. But it exists. the biggest reason I think is the cultural consideration. We don't talk about it. We don't teach our children. We don't ask our children. We don't have a culture of asking children, baby, may I hug you? So if I go and meet a cousin of mine and their children are around, it's just expected that I will hug them. It's just expected that if elders sort of touch you on your shoulder, or if they touch you on your head, it's okay. Um, Kenneth, am I audible? I heard from one of the members that they can't hear me.
Yes, we can hear you well.
Awesome, thank you. Um, so there are all those things, and then there is of course the lifestyle choices. So the general assumptions that go with all sort of patriarchy and all sort of misogyny influence a lot of conditioning when it comes to how women can express their consent, how children can express their consent or not consent. I'm not even talking of sexual consent when it comes to minors. I'm talking of just the general consent of, do I want to be hugged, do I want to be held in somebody's arms? So that conversation is not there. The only piece of advice I give to people is, if you're in doubt, err on the side of caution and use all the tools that are possible. So, the first tool I think for consensual conversations is education and awareness. You need to know that there is something called as consent that exists. And when I recently did a survey. I was doing a very basic survey saying, do you know about what LGBTQ is? And the survey, the demographic was 25 to 50-year olds in Delhi with a bare minimum of a graduate degree. And the responses that I got were surprising. Half the people do not know about what consent is. 60%, 62% people did not know what what non-consent is, and 92% people did not know what consensual non-consent is. I understand that the sample size might have been small, but I don't think that the sample size, given the kind of setting that I'd chosen for these people, was really the unaware sorts. And these people most likely have younger children growing up, and it's surprising, and it's sort of, I wouldn't say disappointing, but I would say that it needs a lot of work. So education and awareness, communication. Like this gentleman, he said, you're making it too technical, because he did not want to put out so many things in black and white on paper. One of the beauties about, I think one of the most beautiful things about alternative sexualities is that there is so much communication that happens, that there is the chance to make a mistake with someone's safety and with someone's sanity is relatively very low compared to the regular vanilla heterosexual relationships. There is another tool that I use, which is mind mapping, and I think everybody should do their individual mind maps. Sit down, look at the sexuality map, look at a long list of kinks, look at a long list of things that you like in life and that you don't like in life. And I personally find it more empowering to begin from what you do not like, because it's easier to express your hard limits. The exploration bit or the softer limits can come later. So the mind mapping, I find a lot of quizzes also useful, especially in terms of BDSM. The BDSM test.org is really interesting. It allows people to explore themselves very well. Negotiations is another thing that I keep telling people about. You don't have to end up sleeping with someone just because you met them on Tinder tonight. It's great to have a hookup. It's very pleasurable to have a hookup. But if someone cannot respect the fact that you're not carrying condoms and nor are they, maybe you don't want to have sex with that person, even if casual. So, and in terms of relationships or in terms of ongoing partnerships, I think negotiation becomes all the more important, because life is really short to go back and look back and say, oh, I wish I hadn't made that mistake. And it's not just about pregnancy, it's also about STDs. And people don't talk about it. We don't have a culture of getting ourselves tested for it and sharing reports out here. It really takes a lot of effort. Like as a woman, I have experienced that when I go and ask men, show me your, I want to see your STD reports, I want to see a sexual health report, they sort of freak out. And I'm like, if I'm going to have sex with you, I might as well have that information handy, and you might as well have that information handy for me. But half the times, this is the reason why they will back off, because they don't want to share that information, because they feel like if they have to go and get tested, they're going to be looked down upon, they're going to be judged for getting tested in the first place. Safe words are about, so I find safe words very empowering. When someone in the middle of having sex, if someone says, okay, stop, it can come across as a personal rejection. But if someone says pumpkin, it's not a personal rejection anymore. So I think safe words are a great way to depersonalize and still be able to say that you don't want something to happen to you, and be able to listen to the other person not wanting something. Safe calls, again, out here in the country, people are very resistant and hesitant, because that would basically mean that you need to have a friend whom you can confide in. It means that you need to have someone you can tell that you're going to sleep around with someone else. And a lot of men, especially people who are in existing monogamous relationships, people who are not open about their polyamorous preferences to their partners, people who are in the first place operating from a place of non-consent, find very difficult. So in a way, it's also a great filter. If someone's not being open about their choices of sexuality, then maybe you want to choose differently. Maybe you don't want to choose them as a partner. Then there were the non-verbal cues, especially handy as a submissive for me personally, and also for other people in sessions which involve pain, in sessions which involve physical restriction, especially which involve blindfolding and gagging. The non-verbal cues are a great way. But I personally feel and recommend that people should not do extreme activities, especially in the initial phases of their relationships and also with strangers, because it's best to be able to use your voice when you need to use it. And then there is the legalese, which I'm not really a legal expert, so I'm not really an authority to sort of talk about it. But there are a few hard limits that I think everybody should set. One of them is the age, because it's illegal to get involved in a sexual activity with minors, and it's as simple as that. If you have a problem with the coming of age, with the age when somebody is a legal adult, well, that's the advocacy that you want to do. So a lot of times I get devil's advocate who sort of question, oh, but 16-year-olds and 15-year-olds are more sexually aware. Sure, they are aware. Doesn't necessarily mean that you need to have sex with them. The same applies for polyamorous relationships, the same applies for BDSM, the same applies for people with disabilities. And of course, then there's an entire definition and various interpretations of how rape is perceived in the court and outside of it. So yeah, when in doubt, err on the side of caution. That's the presentation, and thank you everybody for listening. Let's open the floor for questions. I think someone raised a hand somewhere. I'm going to close the presentation now. Kenneth, we can allow people to sort of either write the questions in the chat or they can ask on the voice. Rajiv, I think, raised a hand for the question. Rajiv, do you want to ask your question? Dave says thank you. Thank you, Dave. It was a great opportunity to speak to all of you about this. Manish, I'm glad you found it informative and enlightening. guys like to do a quiz? Maybe I can ask you questions and you guys can type your responses in yes, no, maybe. Okay, awesome. So so let's do a quiz. Let's do a quick quiz. So this question is for okay, I think Kenneth would like to do a sort of Q&A. Kenneth, do you want to do a Q&A? There was a question. How do you explain these principles of consent to people who are so used to having their consent violated or automatically assumed by their partner? Daniel, this is a great question, Daniel. Most Indian wives, for instance, are very, very used to having their consent violated. We are conditioned, we are raised in a way where we are told that one fine day we will get married and we will need to surrender to the wills of our husbands. And much as we, sort of, we are in denial of it as a society, but that's the truth. Now, how do we explain these principles? So when I talk to people in the local language, I usually begin with asking them, who initiates sex between the two of you? Do you find yourself able to say a no when you don't want it? Do you really enjoy it? Do you like it? What elements of it do you like? What elements of it do you not like? When you don't like it, how do you say a no? And the more we probe, what I have realized in my work with women out here is that the more I probe, the more they think for themselves. So instead of giving them a prescriptive remedy and saying that you need to be able to find it in yourselves to say no, I find it more useful to ask them leading questions which make them think and which make them then come back to me and say, Didi, I think I should have said a no. And then my response is, do you want to say it the next time? And sometimes they are actually able to do it and find the power. Sometimes they are not. And when they come back and say, no, I couldn't say a no this time as well, it is important that I compassionately listen to them and that we sort of support them and say that. And also, of course, it is also important to assess whether they are in immediate physical danger or not. And then that's where the uh, social service people come in. That's where the activists come in. That is where the NGOs come in. So the whole network and the whole community support becomes important in that sense. Dani, how can people be more aware of consent, especially since it's not commonly taught in everyday life or bypassed? One of the things that I do with a lot of children, so I'm 35, I have a lot of friends who are married and who have children who are growing up, children who are in the age group of 8 to 14. I do a lot of conversations with their mothers, especially with their mothers because the children spend more time there. And the conversations will revolve around, do you ask permission to touch your own child? Do you ask permission to hug your own child? This is something that we were talking about in the huddle time as well. At this moment, on a community level, we are at a very, very basic level of communication. So how can people be more aware? The adults, well, we re-educate the adults. The youngsters, we educate them in the first place, and we teach them that they have the control and the power on their own bodies. Kevin, the issue about marital rape, wasn't there a law that passed recently in India? I am not fully aware of the implications of the law yet, and also because I'm not a legal expert, Kevin, I sort of wanted to skip that portion, not because I didn't want to address it, but more because I wasn't the authority on it. I think there are a lot of legal issues that we still need to resolve. One is marital rape and how it is understood, how it is defined. One is how about the assault of men, if there is. We out here, we just assume that men don't get assaulted and men don't undergo rape. And then also around same-sex marriages. So we're still struggling with a lot of that aspect. Manish's question. At start, you mentioned about respectfully asking a person if he or she wants to get engaged in sexual activity. Can you elaborate more? So Manish, I guess your question is coming, please correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. I am assuming that your question is coming from a place of how do we ask an Indian girl out to have sex with you? Um, in general, my recommendation in the Indian context is that, and also in general in life, is that sex can't be the first conversation you have with someone unless you know the person and unless you've interacted with them, engaged with them on an intellectual level at least, if not emotional. Um, Asking them if they want to have sex with you directly can also be treated as them being objectified. So you need to be aware of how they look at sex. So maybe a good idea is to ask them if they are sexually active, if they even want to explore sexuality with you, and then you can always tell them that you are interested in them, you would like to explore sex with them if they consent to it. And if they say a no, please back off. If they say a no, don't give them thousand reasons of why they should have sex with you, because this is one thing that really puts us women off. Men just don't understand a no. So, and this is a generalization, and I get it, but that's the common experience as well. And I don't mean it in a demeaning way towards men, but I mean it as a reality that we face on a day-to-day basis. So please don't try to convince them, don't try to coax them, cajole them, manipulate them. If they say a no, please back off. There is a private question that's been asked. Do you also have your STD test run? How often do men or anyone has anyone asked for it from you before? Yes, I've been asked for it. I've shared it. I when I am active, I usually get it done once in 6 months. If there are long phases of sexual inactivity, which there are in my case, because I have also dealt with a lot of chronic depression, and there have been long phases of abstinence, like willing abstinence. In those phases, I haven't gotten tested, but usually I get it done every 6 months to 1 year, depending on how active I am. Martha, I know so many people who have difficulties to speak up, if at all, for fear of hurting their partner. They don't understand that if they can't speak their no, their yes means nothing. How to deal with pent up anger at people who have violated our consent through the years. Now, I will sort of answer this question more theoretically because, in my personal experience, I haven't had my consent violated. But I think one of the ways to deal, but I have had people who've pissed me off left, right, and center and who chased me and stalked me online and offline for years, pushing me to have sex. And to me, that was that was really frustrating. It was very annoying, and it sort of made me angry at the respectful people. So maybe in that sense, I can relate with this question. How I got past it is I started talking about consent. That was my way of coping with it. My way of coping with the fact that people don't understand sexuality, that people don't understand about how I feel as a submissive, was to write books about it. One of the things that I know works always is to have a great support system, have community, have close friends. And I understand that not everybody might have that privilege. In that sense, online communities also helped me a lot, because when you have people who you can tell that your consent was violated, or who you can tell that you still feel angry about it, or who you can vent out in front of, I think that shifts, that causes a lot of shift. Martha, I'm sorry, I don't have a better answer than this, but I hope that answers your question to some extent. That helping other people feel empowered about it, and helping and having a safe space where you can vent your anger out helps a lot. If we say no or don't give consent, do we need to explain why? Fiona, I think it depends on the person that you are with. I, for instance, to some people, I do explain a why. If they've been long term friends, if they are someone that I really am fond of in general, and if I say a no to them, I do uh, try to explain why. But then there are random strangers who I meet on dating apps. I don't feel like I owe them an answer, and so I don't explain why. So maybe you want to look at what your general relationship with that person is, and then see how you want to go about it. But at the end of the day, I think there's one trap that we need to be mindful of in explaining why we don't want to have sex. I don't find it in my heart to open up the can of worms of the whole to and fro and the whole reasoning and the whole no, but here is why you should. So when it shifts to that end, that's when I stop explaining. So even if it was my best friend who approached me and I said I don't want to have sex with you because you're married and I don't go around with married men, if he starts convincing me, that's when I cut the conversation off, because convincing means you don't respect my no. So there's no point explaining it to you. So maybe that's how you want to look at. Manish says yes because I have seen. Okay. So Manish, I'm assuming this yes is in terms of Indian women, that you wanted to figure out how to sort of approach Indian women because you've seen people wasting half the life passing this hurdle, how to guide them. The simplest way, and I know there is some entitlement when I say this because I have a supportive family, I have a supportive set of friends, so it's easier for me to do, and I understand it's not as easy for everybody to do it. The simplest way of getting past this hurdle is to simply ask what you want and be able to understand a no for a no. So if you want to have sex with someone, just ask them, walk up to them and ask them. If they say a no, and tell them that you don't mean it as an insult. I understand that a lot of Indian women perceive it as an insult when a man approaches them and asks them if they want to have sex. It's okay to walk up and say, hey, I don't mean it in a demeaning way, but I would really like to sleep around with you. Would you be interested? And if they say a no, please back off. I think backing off is what is going to give them trust in you instead of just pushing the agenda. Rohan asks me, if one partner has taken consent for every sexual act and throughout sexual relationship, is it weird or can the partner feel awkward? Rohan, it might be awkward, but it's necessary. I might consent to having sex with someone, but I might not consent to being tied up. And if they don't ask me and if I don't tell them, then they don't know it. I might consent to having sex with someone. I might not consent to having unprotected sex with them because I'm not married to them and because I don't want to have children with them. If they don't ask me and if I don't say it out aloud, then it's going to be a more larger problem than the mere awkwardness of it. So my way of dealing with awkwardness is, if you find it awkward in speaking stuff out, please feel free to write emails to each other. Please feel free to collate a Google document or a Google sheet where both of you can sort of put down what you want and what you don't want. Categorize things into extremely interested, hard limits, soft limits, all of that. That's a better way of doing it rather than avoiding it because you're awkward about it. Thank you, Martha. Bernard says, in domestic partnerships or marriages where there is a duty to the partner for sex, how do you distinguish between a genuine yes versus an obligatory yes? Interesting question, Bernard. The genuine no versus an obligatory no, safe words are a great way. And I think a similar way of dealing with a genuine yes or an obligatory yes is also the same. So the red, yellow, green mechanism that a lot of BDSM practitioners use, I find it very useful in vanilla sex situations also. If there is something that you absolutely do not want, a red is your key phrase. If there is something that you genuinely want instead of a duty, green is your key phrase. If you are performing sex with your partner because it's your duty, maybe you want to say a yellow or an orange, and they would know that they need to probe, they need to be gentle, they need to ask, they need to inquire. So maybe when you're not sure of your partner's consent, maybe when you're thinking that they're doing it out of a sense of duty, maybe you want to ask them the red, green, yellow. If they say a green, then you know that it's not just a duty thing, it's something that they're enjoying, they want it. If they say a yellow, then maybe you know that maybe they don't want it, but they're doing it because they want to please you. And I honestly also think that if it's an empowered relationship, if it's a relationship where both the people are used to communicating with each other, gradually over time, this improves. So there are no cookie cut standard solutions. I think it works differently for everybody who's in a given dynamic. Mm, if one is sexually active and is taking precautions, how often is it needed for a report? I think as often as you and your partners feel safe about. If you're already using barrier protection, if you're using condoms, it's fairly safe unless you think the condom has gotten ruptured or unless you suspect something that has gone amiss. 6 months should be fine. There is another question. What is awkward gets easier, better with practice? It is linked with the fear of being judged, laughed at, change. That's true, Martha. This is, I think, in continuation with the question that Rohan asked. That what about the awkwardness? Rohan, like Martha also said, and I said the same thing, that it might be awkward, but over time you practice, over time you get used to it, and over time it gets better. It actually starts feeling and you will notice the more you practice this communication, the more confidence you will have in your sexual interactions, because then you will know that you are most likely not making an error because you've checked things with your partner. Do I have any suggestions of how to teach the concept of consent for people with mental or intellectual disabilities so that they can prevent being taken advantage of by others? Um, so, I wish I had a good answer for this, Herrick. No, I do not have those suggestions because I do not work in the mental disability spectrum space. I would like to. I am working with a few mental health professionals now in this area because I also want to learn this aspect better in terms of being a coach. But I can tell you from my personal experience as someone with chronic depression as to how did I deal with it. It took me some time before I reached a point where I knew what I wanted to say and what I did not want to say. But then again, I come from a different cultural context. So out here, I was expected to be a virgin till I got married. So it was easy for me to by default keep saying a no, 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 no. I won't do this. I won't do that. I won't do that. So my first sexual experience happened when I was 30, and it was quite late, and this was despite the fact that I was engaging in a lot of non-sexual BDSM. I was engaging in a lot of pain play. I was engaging in a lot of domestic submission, so to say. And so it was not a challenge that I had to deal with, and so I don't have many more insights. But I am happy to find this answer. I can reach out to the mental health experts that I work with and figure out if they have any inputs. In India, it is assumed that sex is only after. Yeah, Martha, please, if you have inputs on that, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. So I work with people on the autism spectrum and people with intellectual and physical disabilities. The hardest thing with people on the autism spectrum, even for the ones with who are high functioning in the mainstream education system, is that they are also trying to protect their parents. So their parents protect them, but they are actually also trying to protect their parents. So they, because of their behavior, they may be alienated from friends. And if they don't know how to have friends, it is difficult for them to move on to looking for a romantic sexual partner. And it doesn't seem like an issue until they realize that actually they didn't learn about the importance of making friends and conversation. So I might start off by okay. So anyway, with people with on the autism spectrums, because they are very literal, I've had to look at other books that give a lot of suggestions on how to teach them about navigating social skills, and something as simple as uh, um, teaching them consent by having, say, two roles. What are yes signals and what are no signals? So like the presentation just now, silence is no. And stop asking with the first no. You actually
Yeah.
have to say this to them and actually have to repeat to them again and again. And what they understand in one scenario may not apply to other scenarios. So it's a little bit like firefighting because they can take the answer very literal. So with people with intellectual disabilities, with lower IQ, it's not that they don't understand and they will never understand. It's that I have had to explain to them something that I would probably explain one time to someone with normal IQ. I've had to explain something like 10 times, 20 times before they can even remember or even get it. So, so the training that I have done involves the parents and then also involves working with the kids themselves with the consent of the parents, but sometimes the parents. So the parents are actually very, very concerned about their kids committing sexual offenses and violations. So that is the reason why the parents are coming, because in Singapore, people with intellectual disability are charged in court the same way as people without intellectual disabilities. So when parents knew this, they are very concerned. And so slowly I'm starting to do workshops for parents. So this includes basically coming out very, very clear handouts. And I came out with these clear handouts because I have read other books related to people with intellectual disability. So practices on consent can be something as an example of a consent can be asking them how they feel when you are forcing them to eat something or do something that they don't like to do. So you don't like it, right? Then that person also doesn't like it when you keep asking them. So by using analogies and creative thinking for them to see the parallel. So people are, a lot of people are actually worried about people with intellectual disabilities and educating them anything. It's almost as if we are afraid of going there because it's difficult. But actually, because we have not gone there, we have not talked about this, they have no exposure at all. So they are starting from zero. So even somebody who is 30 is actually has very, very little knowledge about consent. So I think we as a community needs to tackle it, whether it's you're an educator or you're a friend or a family member, to start to realize that being overprotective is not going to help them. Okay, anyway, I can go on and on and on. But I would say I can recommend a few books, and I actually have a playlist, and anyway, I'll just share it below.
So I'll take the last two questions that are here in the chat. In India, it is assumed that sex is only after marriage. If someone has premarital sex and that fact is known to others, he or she may have less preference for marriage, even if the rejecting person is sexually active premaritally. Social image is more valued. Well, yes, it is more valued, but it doesn't have to be. It is more valued because nobody bothered to change it, because nobody bothered to talk about it, because nobody bothered to push their boundaries. For instance, right now, I am here talking about my experiences. You are here sharing from your learnings. And if more people keep doing that, then it'll be easy to normalize people's sexual desires and experiences, just like it is easy to normalize their hunger and their thirst and their need to breathe. Sex is as normal a bodily function and as normal a need as is any other. And I think the more people talk about it, the more people discuss about it in a healthy, respectful manner without causing sleazy jokes, we'll be better off. So as far as should you worry about, I didn't really get the question. If the question is should you be worried about the social image, well, it's a personal choice that you make. If you are worried about it, I wouldn't judge you. If you're not worried about it, well, all power to you. Rohan says, is it physical intimacy and emotional intimacy? Are they interconnected or exclusive? Why most Indian girls need emotional connection for physically intimate pleasure? They are interconnected, Mohan, and they are not interconnected. It's both. In like strict terms, they are exclusive because emotional connect. That's why people are polyamorous. I might feel emotionally intimate with someone and physically intimate with someone else. But why do Indian girls need emotional connection? Partly because they are conditioned, partly because they see everybody behaving around them a certain way, and it's expected that that is how it should be. Partly also because people do want to feel intimate with their partners. If I want to have sex with someone, I do feel like having an intellectual connect with them. I do feel like having an emotional connect with them. And it's not just a unique phenomenon to girls, it's also a phenomenon for men. So it's, I don't think it's a gendered thing in the sense that why do people feel that way, but it is a gendered thing in the sense of conditioning bit of it. Then, okay, Martha has shared a few links. There is a private question. I live in a small town in India. I was heavily criticized by others for having premarital relationship. It was a heavy impact on my mind. I am sorry you had to go through it. Uh, so have I. So have a few other friends, and it's not pleasant. And I understand and I hear you. What can you do to change about it is the question. Are you willing to talk about it openly? Are you willing to maybe create a safe space for other friends of yours who you know are having premarital relationships? Do they feel confident enough to walk up to you and not feel judged? And I think gradually, the more that happens, the more your tribe will be. So how my journey began was I told my parents that I want to get married to someone who's sexually open minded. And out here, in an arranged marriage scenario, you don't expect parents to go and find check sexual compatibility for their children. And I was when we were having huddle time, one of you was mentioning about how parents respond to their children's conversations around sex. So I had a similar experience, and my mother said, "How do we go about finding that guy?" I said, "Ask them for their sexually transmitted diseases report. Ask them for their sexual health checkup reports." And that led to a whole series of conversations around why is sex important to you, why do you want to write about sex, why not write about politics, why not why not write about religion, why not write about health, food, whatever else. And one conversation leading to another, and that's why I say I like to change the world one conversation at a time. This is a conversation that you and I are having here. If you can go back to your community, your offline community, and tell them that, hey, you know what, I think this is an important conversation to have, let's talk about this, or forget about talking about this, why don't you go and just watch this video on this amazing website. Now that is where their perspective maybe starts shifting. Maybe it will not shift, but maybe it will. And that maybe it will is what keeps us driving. So the way to deal with that impact is to start creating your tribe and start talking about it slowly, gradually, at your own pace, but do that. Yes, please. These links that Martha has shared, please shortlist them, and also please feel free to ask me questions privately if you don't want your names read. Rohan, you're welcome. I think one of the things that I really sort of want to say when I speak from this forum is that these conversations may not be easy, but that is what makes them important. And like Martha said, they are not easy because we haven't been doing them. It's like when we were children, 2 plus 2 equals to 4 used to be very difficult. Now it comes to us as a muscle memory. And if we start talking about this stuff, then probably the next generation will find this as muscle memory. So it's important to keep talking and having those discussions. Kenneth, do you have any questions that have been asked to you? I've addressed all those that were asked to me. Awesome. So should we then sort of close the session? Cool. So thank you, everybody. Dr. Lee, thank you for having me here. It was a pleasure. And I do look forward to listening to all the awesome sessions that are going to follow. Any of you have, thank you, Daniel. And thank you, everybody, for listening in, for also asking your questions. And let's stay in touch during the festival for the next few days. It's exciting. Thanks.
Thank you, Anupama, for that very meaningful and insightful conversation. So, as a reminder, so if you have any feedback, how you feel about this topic, please fill up the form. We just pasted it. So, for those who are here and also watching this recording, please fill up our feedback form. And then later, at around 10 or maybe right after this, we will also have a huddle. It's not recorded, so anyone can join if you feel like having something to converse more. So we will stop recording now. Thank you, everyone.